Look at the weather.
It's beautiful here.
Non-stop rain.
Oh, man, it is a blazer out there.
It's cold and it's shivery.
It is cold.
It's really coming down here.
I really enjoy your weather reports.
From the All Indiana Podcast Network, we're talking weather in a whole new way. From historical events to what's coming up, plus weather news, science, safety, fun facts, and more.
I like where this is going.
This is Weather Weekly. Weather Weekly with Wish TV Storm Track 8 meteorologist Marcus Bailey.
Oh, welcome back. Weather Weekly. Here we go with another week. Had a brief week off here, but we got a good one here for you coming up. We'll talk more about our guests here in just a second. Quick weather headlines here. Got our first snow accumulation in the state of Indiana over the weekend. Picked up a couple of inches of snow up in northeastern portions of the state. It came to a little bit of a surprise. Came down like gangbusters, too, about 1 to 2 inches, places like Angola and in Fort Wayne. It was all rain for most of central and southern Indiana. Some areas picked up well over 1 inch of rainfall with the combo of Saturday and Sunday. With the chilly temperatures, just made for kind of an ugly weekend across the area. It does look like we are going to start cooling things down after a relatively mild holiday week. That includes the Thanksgiving holiday. There might be some severe weather coming our way through the middle of the week as well, with some gusty wind potential with a cold front moving through on Wednesday. But mid-50s, probably all the way through the end of this holiday week. Some slightly cooler air could be inbound for the weekend. And it looks like a good shot of maybe our first real blast of chilly Canadian air coming in early in the work week next week. And that will put the end to the month of November, heading into December 1st. December 1st will mark the beginning of meteorological winter. It also, interestingly enough, will, at least on the calendar, mark the end of hurricane season. The end of November is the end of hurricane season. Thank goodness. Hopefully we don't see much more activity as we go into the winter months. After it's been a record-breaking year, record-breaking for named storms, record-breaking for the amount of storms that made landfall in the United States, or at least the continental United States. So we are excited to put that to bed here for this year, this 2020 year. My guest coming up here, you're going to like this one. If you're a winter weather lover, you'll really enjoy this interview. Mike Ryan, he's the senior meteorologist at the National Weather Service office in Indianapolis every year. And he's been doing this for about 20 years for Ohio Valley winter forecasts. Just really good at breaking down how the forecast looks, why he's leaning a certain way. And there's so much that goes into winter weather forecasts as we get going over the next few months. This year is going to be a La Nina year. That deals with teleconnections and the temperature water out in the equatorial Pacific. He's going to talk a whole lot more about how that plays a role. He's going to look back on some years that may have kind of a similar setup, coming out of a drier fall and then heading into a La Nina, a moderate La Nina or a strong La Nina like we may be anticipating here for the winter of 2020 and 2021. And I'll tell you this, just kind of a preview, a teaser, if you will, before we get to the meat and bones of all of this interview. He feels really confident about this forecast and how things are kind of shaping up and what it could mean for winter weather, because that's the $1 million question, right, that we always get. How bad will this winter be? We'll break down some of Mike's answers. That's coming up next here on Weather Weekly. All right, on this week's episode of Weather Weekly, we have a fun one here if you're a winter weather lover. This is one that we always look forward to here every season. Senior meteorologist of the National Weather Service in Indianapolis, Mike Ryan, and we always look forward to his forecast. Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Doing good, Marcus. Good to see you.
Good to see you. All right, let's kind of get down into, I know you spend a lot of time on these forecasts, and you go in great detail, which we're going to spend some time on here. Kind of first, and I correct me if I'm wrong, I thought I had notes from last year when you did this forecast. Last year seemed like it was a little more tricky, and I think you had kind of a lower confidence going into last year. How did last year ended up playing out in terms of where we ended up and the way your kind of forecast looked too?
Well, you have a good memory, because it was my lowest confidence in the forecast, and I've been doing them here for Central Indiana since 2009, so over the last decade. It was a weaker El Nino, just a lot of competing factors that we weren't quite sure how it was going to play out. And the first half of the winter played out the way we thought it would. We had some mixture of warm and cold. We had, if you remember, I think it was the Sunday, the weekend, either before Christmas or 2 weekends before, where we had what would end up being our heaviest snowfall of the season. I think we had a little over 7 inches here in Indianapolis. We expected it to transition to a colder pattern after the new year, and it never really did. We had kind of that colder air that was bottled up over the Arctic region, and it never was able to make any sort of significant inroads down into the mid-latitudes across the Ohio Valley. And so we actually ended up behaving a little bit more like a La Nina style winter. The second half of the winter last year, it got really wet. We dealt with some flooding in the latter part of the winter in February and into March, and we stayed warm. And that kind of continued into the spring after that as well. So first half of the winter was good. Second half of the winter didn't really go
Hey, you know what? In our business, though, especially if you're doing long range, at least if you're getting parts of it right, you're feeling at least somewhat good about it. Yeah. So this year's interesting now because you mentioned that we were in a weak El Nino, but you said it had more characteristics of a La Nina. Now we flip it, and we're in looks like going into a La Nina phase this season. And you feel, I know, watching the seminar a couple of days ago that you guys had at the Weather Service, you feel a little more confident about this one this year, right?
Yeah, my confidence is definitely higher this year, and that partly has to do with the kind of conditions we typically see when we're in a La Nina phase during the winter. Now, it varies on the strength of the La Nina somewhat, but a typical, I guess, characteristic, if you will, is that we see a more active storm track with greater frequency coming into the Ohio Valley. So that's automatically going to create a more active weather pattern, produce the potential for more precipitation. The most significant aspect of a La Nina winter here in the Ohio Valley is that we are wetter than normal, and that holds serve this year in the outlook forecast that we've put together. We feel very confident in wetter than normal conditions, which may seem a little weird to people now because we just went through a rather historic dry period here in central Indiana from late August through the end of October. And we've gotten a little bit more active now into November, but we think that the pattern's going to take a little while to establish, probably not until after the new year where we get much more active and wetter. And the second half of the winter is likely to be really active going into the early spring. So we feel pretty good about that. When we've gone back and looked at La Nina winters since 1950, nearly 70% of them have a wetter than normal winter here in the Ohio Valley. So we're really, really confident in that aspect.
I guess I'll get to a few more other questions, but since you brought it up with the kind of the dry spell that we had, and I know that we were able to kind of knock that down a little bit in the latter weeks of what it was October, or in October we were able to knock it down. Does that play a little bit of a role, or do you think that we had enough? Because a lot of times, especially in the summer times, we often say droughts can end up feeding on themselves, right? When you're dry, it's just really hard to break it.
Right.
Does that kind of play a factor a little bit when you do going into a winter weather season at all?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things we found, I use what are called analog years. There's certain years where basically we look at similar things that were in place going into that year. And it's not just La Nina. That's one aspect of it. I mean, we look at other teleconnection patterns, what the fall was like, which points to your question. And in a lot of these years, especially with stronger, moderate to stronger La Ninas, the falls were dry. One of the years, and kind of more recently that we looked at, was the 2010-2011 winter, which had a very, very dry fall in 2010. And then things got progressively more active, especially the second half of the year. And we ended up actually getting a fair amount of snow the second half of the year. I'm not saying that's going to happen this year,
right?
But that had to do with some other patterns within the atmosphere that enabled colder air to make it down more frequently through the latter half of the winter that year.
You mentioned some of the other factors, and I'll let you touch on these. I know in past, I don't know if it was last year, maybe the year before, there was like an unusual warm blob of water near Alaska that was going to play a role.
Sure.
What are kind of the factors that you're looking at? And like you said, it's just not La Nina. It's not just what what we're coming out of in the fall, but there's a lot of other things globally that are going to go into this forecast.
Sure. And something, why don't we take a step back for your viewers?
Sure.
When we talk about La Nina and El Nino, it's a part of what we call the El Nino Southern Oscillation. And basically, with that, it all has to do with what sea surface temperatures, what the water temperatures in the equatorial Pacific are doing related to normal. When we talk about an El Nino phase, they're positive or warmer than normal. La Nina, they're colder than normal, and that's what we're seeing this year. It's interesting because the location of the coldest water and the intensity of the coldest water can have subtle impacts on exactly what happens downstream into North America. This year, let me say, first of all, with a classic La Nina, we tend to see the coldest water in the eastern part of the basin off of the South America coast, Ecuador, Peruvian coast, that area. Mm-hmm. This year, we found that it's extending all the way back into the central part of the equatorial basin. So what impact is that necessarily going to have? Well, we can go back and look at previous years where the placement of the coldest water was kind of broader, and it gives us some ideas of where we may be able to go. I think that's probably going to aid and maybe a potential for a little warmer than normal conditions throughout the winter, as opposed to kind of a near to above normal scenario, which is typically what we see in a La Nina pattern, just because the storm track comes up into the Ohio Valley. So we kind of oscillate back and forth between the colder air trying to work down from the upper Midwest and the warmer air from the southeast. I think a lot of signs are pointing to the potential for us to actually be warmer than normal throughout the winter. Doesn't mean we can't have colder periods, over short time frames. That's definitely going to be a possibility and frankly a likelihood. But in general, when we're all said and done and we get into March and we look back at our average temperatures, I think we're going to find that we end up above normal. And that probably has something to do with the specific location of the coldest water, along with some of the other items that are going on in the upper levels of the atmosphere influencing the jet stream track and so on.
This may be looking a little bit too deep in the crystal ball, but I think it's worth an ask, is especially since you're leaning more that it may take a while to get the winter kind of kick-started here, right? Second half or whatever. And with an active track potentially going warmer than normal, does that lead you to a concern as we get kind of end of winter, early spring, if we hold that opens the gate up for maybe more active with severe weather kind of thing?
Absolutely, Marcus. And again, research going back into previous years where we've been in a La Nina phase in the winter, more often than not, because we maintain that very active storm track through the region, whether it be the Ohio, Tennessee Valley, but in that area, in our area, as the warmer air starts to filter north and the moisture from the Gulf in the spring, it automatically increases the potential for severe weather. And it becomes dependent on exactly where the storms track, where you're located. For us, we obviously need the storms track a little bit to the northwest of us to get into the warm sector and have access to that warm, moist, southerly air coming off the Gulf. But getting back to research and historical trends, coming out of a La Nina phase automatically increases and enhances the severe weather risk across the Ohio and Tennessee valleys, and really even back into the lower Mississippi and southern plains, lower Mississippi Valley and southern plains. And some of the most notable La Nina years have been very, very active with severe weather. Now, I'm not talking very, very active, but I think definitely we're going to be more active. 73, 74 was an active late winter into spring. It was a La Nina, a strong La Nina, and of course, many of our longtime residents here will remember that the super outbreak occurred in April of 74. 2010, 2011, which I referenced earlier. Many will remember 2011 was a very active year for severe weather across not just our area, but down into the mid and deep south and back into the southern plains. So, yes, we are more concerned about the threat for severe weather going into the spring. But I think because of the active pattern later in the winter as well, that's going to increase the potential for at least a few chances for severe weather even through the winter when we get the storm track to our northwest, where maybe we get kind of a quick line that maybe doesn't have a lot of lightning with it, but storms that produce a fair amount of wind with them, almost a little bit like what we saw yesterday, which I'm referencing, was November 10th with the front that came through.
Gotcha. I think this was interesting that you brought up, and I guess I didn't really think about it, and then I was just because it's been a weird year, but it is 2020. We, and I say we as a meteorological community, reference averages on almost everything. Specifically, since what we're talking about now is winter and snowfall and where we stand when we're kind of into the mid-20s in terms of inches. But this is going to be the last year that we're kind of on our base now. And I don't want to give away the lead because I think you'll explain this a little bit better and what you think may end up happening when we kind of start to flip the calendar next year. So kind of explain about how those averages that we use work, because I think people are just like, in general, that's what we average out, but that it changes, right?
The averages do change. We utilize a rolling 30-year average that changes every 10 years. So we're coming up on new changes that are going to go into effect next year, probably late spring into the summer. We've been running under the average 30-year period, which goes 1981 to 2010. That's going to change. We'll drop the 80s off, and we'll transition to a 1991 to 2020 average period beginning next year. Now, how I think that's going to change things for the winter, especially here in Indianapolis and central Indiana, is a couple of things. We currently average a little under 26 inches of snowfall here in Indianapolis for the entire season, not just taking into account the winter. I think that number probably will drop a little bit. I don't think it's going to be an excessive drop, but I think it's going to scale back a little bit. The other change I think we're going to see is I think we're going to see our average temperature for the winter increase a little bit. Okay. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be because of the daytime temperatures, but I think where we're going to see the bigger impact maybe with the nighttime average lows, because we have noticed a trend in recent years of that rising slowly, not getting quite as cold. So I think that's, again, I'm not for certain what the averages are going to look like, and we won't know for sure until we get our hands on them later in the spring. But that's my guess is what we're going to see.
And that makes sense. I mean, if you really think about it, I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, I know we've ran close to average in a few years, but, and I'm specifically speaking on snowfall. But there's been several that have been below average. And I can't really think of one off the top of my, I don't have the list, but I can't think of one off the top of my head until, what was it? Was 2012 the really bad year, or 13?
13 into 14.
Okay. I mean, that was a record-breaking year. But we haven't anything even like we can kind of say, oh, we were well above average that year. That was the year, and then it's either been kind of close or we've been below, right?
Sure. And I think, actually, I don't believe we've been above normal since 2015.
Interesting.
Over the last 5 years, it seems like we've been averaging more in the ballpark of 15 to 20 inches per year. And last year fell right into the middle of that. We ended up a little over 16 inches last year here in Indianapolis. It was a little bit more to the north, a little bit less to the south. But yeah, 2013, 2014 was the last really big winter. We had a few bigger winters early in the decade. I believe 2009, 2010 was somewhere in the 30s is where it ended up. In 2010, 2011, we ended up in I think around 35 inches here. So, but we've definitely been on a lower level with snowfall over the last 5 years. And at least at this point, not to say that we can't get snow this year, and I think we will, it really becomes dependent on storm track, exactly where it tracks, and if you have the colder air that can make inroads for a period of time. But the trends support likely leaning below normal again this year. And that's where we're going here with our forecast.
Well, to your point, too, and I think I was just thinking about this, the last time possibly that we even got back up to average might have been, I would say maybe it was 2 years ago, and it was because of that late snow that happened during state finals weekend.
Yes.
If you remember, and I think we ended up getting like 10 inches of snow or close to it. In Indianapolis. And it really was just kind of a swath. It wasn't like it was widespread across the whole area. It was basically just here. But that kind of at least helped us get closer to that number.
Right. And I think that got us to within a couple inches of normal. And it's interesting because I don't believe that was a La Nina year. But one interesting thing with La Nina years, and I'm going to reference something from earlier in my career because I began my weather service career over in Ohio. Okay. I worked at an Ohio office. I grew up in Ohio. And 0708, which is another popular analog year we've been utilizing, which was a moderate La Nina phase year. It was a very active year, especially the second half of the winter was active, where we had a lot of storms that were tracking up into the Ohio Valley, a lot of sloppy related storms with precipitation type differences. We had some events with ice, that dreaded I word, which nobody likes.
Right.
But interestingly, we ran below normal with snowfall the entire winter until a late storm impacted not so much central Indiana here, but it impacted areas near the Ohio River and up into the Interstate 71 corridor from Cincinnati up towards Columbus. And I think it was the first weekend in March, we had 15 inches of snow, which essentially turned it into an above normal snowfall winter with one storm.
With one.
And that plays back into the La Nina aspect. If you get the storms tracking a little further south and you can bring enough cold air south, the snow potential is there because you have a lot of moisture with these systems. It's just the variability is so much greater because the storm track itself dictates whether you have snowfall, snow mixing with slop or ice or mainly ice, or rain and storms. It could be a little bit of everything. And that's one reason why, I think we are going to see a little bit of everything as the winter goes on.
When it gives you, I think to your point, it gives the opportunity that you can have a decent storm, because you go back to Meteorology 101. I remember Dr. Arnold, at Ball State, and there was the two main winter storms he always focused on were all Alberta clippers, and what we called, at least in our class, panhandle hooks.
Yep.
That were based out in the panhandle and would sweep up. The panhandle hooks were the ones, and for people that maybe don't understand this, Alberta clippers, there's much colder air, there's not as much moisture with it. You can still get some good snow with that.
Right.
But the panhandle hooks have much more moisture in it, and that's where you can get the real big snow amounts. So to your point, with it being La Nina, you get those kind of those storm tracks. It at least does open the potential, like you said, if the cold air can mesh in here and the timing's right, you could get one storm that's going to put you over the top, maybe.
Absolutely, and that's one reason we've stressed that even though we're below normal on snowfall, or the expectation is that we're going to be below normal snowfall.
Right.
It's certainly something to consider because we've seen that happen in similar years with these conditions in the past. It just ultimately depends on if you can get that colder air to get pulled down and mesh when you have one of these panhandle hooks or a low that's pulling out of the Gulf that tracks up into the Ohio Valley. And you can get that track in just the right way to interact with the colder air to get a decent swath of snow. The concern is always, I do think our risk for precipitation type issues and again, the dreaded I word, ice events, is greater in these years. And a case in point, go back to 2010, 2011, we had a huge ice storm at the end of January and early February that if it wasn't for slightly warmer conditions than were forecast in the low levels of the atmosphere, it could have been a debilitating ice storm in central Indiana. We were forecasting almost an inch of ice potential, which would have been disastrous with the wind. And because we were slightly warmer aloft than what the model guidance presented, we ended up with a little bit more sleet, which sleet is not quite as dangerous as pure freezing rain when it comes to the impacts you can get, and it saved us from a lot worse fate. Now, with that same storm, you go 100, 150 miles to the north up into northern Indiana and the Chicago area, and they had a blizzard. So that comes back to, you go south into Kentucky and it was rain and storms. So that comes back to the whole thought process behind the actual storm track plays a factor. When the storms cut up into the lakes and track up there, we're on the warm side of the storm, and the potential for rain and even severe weather increases. Tracks over the area, maybe it's a mixture, or rain transitioning to a flop or snow on the backside. If it tracks down closer to the Ohio River or points south, then maybe we have our shot at getting more substantial snowfall. And so that's something we can't really forecast going out because it happens on such a short-term basis where we're just really unable to forecast that 3 months in advance. But it's something to be aware of.
Just to get your thoughts, since you brought it up, is there anything more, since you're a Midwest guy too, is there anything more difficult than trying to get down those precip types? Like when you have a situation where it's ice, sleet, rain, snow, and it could be in all of your county warning area. Is there anything more difficult than that?
It's incredibly difficult, Marcus. And I've been forecasting for the Weather Service here in the Ohio Valley for over 20 years now. And winter forecasting is the most challenging type of forecasting. It's what I tell some of our younger forecasters as they come in, our younger meteorologists. And I learn something new every year. Even though I've been doing this for a long time, I learn something new every year. The atmosphere teaches me something new every year. And precipitation type forecasting is headache inducing. And it's funny because we make the joke. It always seems like Interstate 70 here in Indiana is the dividing line.
Mountainous terrain of I-70.
There's no rhyme or reason. There is no meteorological basis in that at all. None. and it somehow works out that way. But when we're looking at putting together a forecast, and you guys, have the same issues when you're doing likewise, if we have any sort of a subtle change of maybe a half degree or a degree at the surface, at 2,000 to 3,000 feet above the ground, that can have a significant impact in the type of precipitation. And the perfect example I mentioned to you was the ice storm I just talked about from 20. Because we were slightly warmer, just a few thousand feet off the ground, sleet became the primary precip type for an extended period as opposed to freezing rain, and it saved our bacon, central Indiana, essentially. And so imagine if we're thinking there's a potential for heavy snowfall, but then we have a little bit more warm air intrusion, and it turns into a mixture of snow and freezing rain and sleet. That's going to knock down those snowfall totals substantially. So it is. It's very difficult at times. And unfortunately, in these La Nina phase winters, those type of storms increase in frequency because we're right on that dividing line a lot of times. In the colder air to the north and the warmer air to the south.
I mean, I'm already sweating now that you're talking about it. And I get to think about this for 3 months, so that's funny.
It really, really challenges us. And it just, it's a big, big challenge.
It's fun, though. I will say, and I'm like you. You learn something new every winter season. And every time you think you got it down, you don't. You
learn something.
It is a very humbling business, right? It is, but it's fun. It's good stuff. All right, Mike, real quick, just to kind of recap. So with this being a La Nina year, you feel good about the forecast. I know you've probably mentioned it a couple of times, but I haven't asked you just straight out. Where do you see us as we get ready to enter spring? How will we look back on this year's winter?
I think what we're going to see is that we end up warmer than normal. Again, that doesn't mean we're not going to have stretches where it's colder. Could we see a night or two where we're below zero? Sure. But I think on average over the 3 months of meteorological winter, which is December, January, February, we're going to finish up warmer than normal when we look back at it. We're most confident in wetter than normal conditions. I think, though, it may take us until mid-January, maybe even late January, early February to get into that more active weather pattern. As we get later in the winter, I think we're going to need to start worrying about the potential for excessive rainfall and flooding, especially if you get a number of storms impacting the area with rain back to back. May seem hard to believe right now with as dry as we still are, but we feel pretty confident that we will eventually get there. And I think the potential for a few severe weather events, especially the second half of the winter, will grow, and that's likely going to parlay right into the spring with more active and wetter conditions and an active severe weather risk going into March and April. So those are our thoughts in terms of snowfall. Still could see plenty of snowfall, but right now our greatest confidence is that we're probably going to end up a little bit below normal on snowfall here in Indianapolis for the year, maybe something on the order of 15 to 20 inches of snowfall.
I love the breakdown, Mike. You make it as plain and simple and easy to understand as just about anybody. You should go into teaching, my man. That's
Well, I've had people say that. I think we have a role, and it's for you guys too. I think all of us as meteorologists have a role to help teach the public and one of the hardest things to do is to take the scientific aspects of what we're looking at in meteorology and transition it into language that the public can easily understand. That's a part of decision service for our partners and for the public, for helping them understand what to expect going into the winter. So I love doing this, man. Whatever we can do to help out the public, that's our role.
Before I let you go, you are an alum of The Ohio State University. Yep.
The Ohio State University,
so,
yes.
How you feeling at this point of the season?
Well, I feel pretty good. Just hope that COVID doesn't sidetrack some of the games. I think that's the big question mark. But I'll tell you, the Ohio State IU game on the 21st, which, of course, will have already happened by the time you put stuff out. But that could be a really fun game. But overall, I'm excited about Ohio State in football. I always am. Looking forward to IU, and kudos and hats off to them and Tom Allen, because I think it's awesome to see him doing so well.
Is it not the most 2020 thing to be like, I think Ohio State's toughest game is going to be against the Hoosiers?
Isn't that? It probably is. Penn State, certainly not going to be Michigan.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to that game. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
That's good stuff. So, all right, Mike, we're going to let you go. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. We appreciate you.
Absolutely, Marcus. So appreciate you guys. Appreciate everything Wish does. Give my best to the entire staff there.
Will do. All right. Thank you, Mike.
All right.
Appreciate you,
Take
man.
care.
Take care. Talk
Bye-bye.
soon. Bye.
All right.
My thanks to Mike Ryan, senior meteorologist at the National Weather Service, for that great interview and kind of get you excited a little bit for winter weather, right? I mean, he said it. It's been a while since we've had a real good snowy season. And look, even though he's going kind of leaning towards that below average number, I think you just have to kind of go back, and you can never guess this far out. But you've got some ingredients there that you're going to have a lot of action, right? And a very active pattern. It just takes that one time to mesh that storm coming in from the south and west that's going to have a lot of moisture and just taking more of a southern track, and we get on the colder end of things, and there's your big snow, and that can add up in a hurry. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out. I'm excited for it. I'm kind of wanting a little bit of snow. How are you thinking about it? I'm not a fan of the late season snow. Like once we get kind of through the holidays, or maybe a little like to the end of January, I'm kind of ready to move on and get into spring, maybe talk some severe weather and warming temperatures and greening of the leaves and the grass and all that stuff. So I don't know how excited I am if we're going to be talking about some real late season snows coming our way. But nonetheless, it'll be good to be talking about some winter weather here coming up over the next few months. Again, my thanks to Mike Ryan from the National Weather Service. My thanks to you for listening to Weather Weekly, the weekly podcast all about weather. We always appreciate your time. If you want more, you can always follow us along here on Facebook and, of course, Twitter, and, of course, at our website at wishtv.com, and always on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Discover more from Storm Track 8 Weather and Wish TV. Online at wishtv.com, and when you follow Wish TV on Facebook. Plus, be sure to check out more great podcasts from the All Indiana Podcast Network now at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.